Hello. I wanted to talk a bit more about Christian nationalism. And last time we talked just a little bit about the Ten Commandments, and we can expect that having the Ten Commandments posted in all schools and government buildings and so on would be sort of automatic if Christian nationalism gets its way. So what does that mean? What does that mean for our understanding of the nature of God? That means that that sort of Christianity would think that God's primary concern is that we should become moral people. Do we doubt that? We certainly agree that God would be happier if we become moral people. But this is not God's only concern, right? God has to be wider than this. First of all, it means that God can only relate to humans because only humans can be either moral or not moral. Right? So then God is not concerned with animals, plants, nature, the universe, and so on. So I just want to mention a particular theology that suggests that God is more than this, and that is process theology. And this is a book by John Cobb. Oops, I think it's backwards. John Cobb and David Ray Griffin. So it actually comes from the source of this theology is actually from Alfred North Whitehead's process philosophy, which is not primarily a theology or a religion, although he does talk about religion. So I just wanted to show that this is a very genuine theology, and there have been many people who have written very deeply about the nature of God and the nature of humans, and have come to understand that this is a time when things are changing. If we continue with the same notion of God as God is in control and things are the way they are because God wants, that's God's will, then nothing's going to change. And that seems to be what Project 2025 wants to take us back to, actually. And then another idea traditionally in Christianity has been the idea of the unmoved mover, that God is not affected by what happens with humans. God is primarily interested only in whether humans achieve salvation or not, which means lead a good life. But process theology and most people, I think now, would expect that God would be affected by the state of humanity. If we are suffering, then we would expect that God would have some feeling about that and would want to change it. Especially that's actually what Jesus sort of came to say, right? That God cares. And you can't care if you're not affected. So process theology, for instance, addresses this point and concludes, very reasonably, that God is both male and female. And this is really a fundamental point that has changed, especially like over the last century, that we now can allow that God may be female, must be, in fact, So we have to think then not just the religion, not just what sort of Christianity is being offered to us, but also who is, where is it coming from in terms of the people involved. So for that, I want to use like an analysis which is fairly common within Christianity. I want to stick with a Christian analysis, and that is the stages of spiritual growth. So I'm going to use an analysis by Scott Peck, who was a Christian, but also as a psychologist, a counselor. And he sort of sorts people into 4 stages, which are the first one is the stage of chaotic and antisocial. And then you grow beyond that, you grow to a point where you're mostly concerned about the laws, and so on and so forth. So what is the point, the stage of chaos? Well, it's pretty much sort of like what you might expect from a 5-year-old. 5-year-olds are basically disordered, chaotic, reckless. They're not following any sort of principles. And it's totally fine when you're 5. That's how you should be. But a lot of people get stuck there. And of course, it's not their fault. I mean, it's not the fault of a 5-year-old that they get emotionally stuck there. But what is appropriate when you're 5 years old is really a big problem. When you're an adult, if you're still behaving recklessly and chaotically, then it's a big problem. And pretty often, people will become criminals who have this tendency. Sometimes, though, they can become presidents, right? It doesn't mean that you're not externally capable necessarily. It's just what is going on in terms of your spiritual development. So then the second stage, and Scott Peck thinks that about 20% of the population is in the chaotic antisocial stage. And then the second stage is like sort of where maybe you have a religious experience, right? You meet the Bible and it's true. You accept that it's true and you have a conversion. And so because this is so different from the chaos that was inside you in the previous stage, then this is your salvation. You are saved. And of course, you want everybody else to be saved. And because this is so fundamental to you and solves your fears, right, and your chaos, then you want everybody to accept and think the same way. This is like black and white thinking. The world is divided into good and evil, right and wrong, us and them, believers and non-believers, and so on. So this is not a very sort of a wide Christianity. It's not an embracing Christianity unless you believe the right way. Okay. So then if you were brought up with that sort of parents, then you probably had a pretty stable upbringing and you know that you're supposed to be loved. You probably felt a certain amount of love. But at some point, maybe you reach the stage where you start to question. And this is considered very bad by the people who are in stage 2, right? You're often considered that you've lost the faith. And you may quite possibly become an atheist, but you haven't become a bad person. So this general agreement amongst Christian thinkers who look into these stages of faith, that this is a higher stage, that this is a stage you have to go through to reach something better. So usually people, when they enter this stage 3, maybe skepticism, questioning, and so on, maybe they become scientists, but many of them still really care about humanity, and they're involved in social justice. Many scientists are doing what they do because they want to help humanity. So this is in no way going back to the chaos. Right? I'm sure you could go back to the chaos, but stage 3 is not going back to the chaos. And so then maybe you spend the rest of your life, being a good person, but being an agnostic or an atheist or whatever. But then there's a stage 4, which people do reach. Some people, maybe not in general, but I feel like America's really, on the verge of wanting to take that step. Maybe the whole world is on the verge of wanting to take that step. And this is a more mystical approach, an approach where you have more compassion and more understanding for people. You sense that everybody's on a journey. You don't condemn people who have a different religion. You're still searching for truth maybe, but truth can be found in many ways. You can see the truth that comes through science. You can see the truth that comes in different religions. So I feel like this is sort of where we're at now, and that we are ready to make this transition. And so I don't feel necessarily that Christian nationalism, as it is being offered to us, is coming from this place. But I don't want to make your decision for you. I just want you to look into, think about the Christian nationalism, and then keep in mind this sense of rigid belief or more open spirituality. Spirituality is not bad.